Hello and welcome to Connected. I'm Divya Gopalan. We're continuing our conversation on the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war. It's the bloodiest conflict in Europe since the Second World War, and it's been raging for more than a year. And because of that, for those of us watching from afar, it runs the risk of moving from the headlines to the sidelines, which is why we believe that this should be a constant conversation to remind us that there are millions suffering and countless lives being lost every day. Now, to continue this conversation from Lviv, Ukraine, we once again welcome Melaniya Podolyak, and from here in Taipei, Olek Shyn. Thank you very much for being on the show again with us. Melaniya, we'll go straight to talking about what Ukraine needs. And as we see, a lot of the international community is focused, and a lot of the voices are talking about weapons. And basically, fundamentally, that is what your forces need. Along with weapons, what else can people, like our normal people in other countries, provide for you?
So weapons obviously are the most important, since that is what actually helps Ukraine, protect what we're doing and keep on going. But when to speak about what regular people can do, it's at the beginning of war, we've had an influx of people sending, medicine and all sorts of humanitarian aid, and it was fine. It was very useful. But at this point, Ukraine is virtually able to supply ourselves with these things we need. However, donating to trusted causes in Ukraine is something that could change a lot. Meaning that, for instance, if a foundation that is concerned with humanitarian aid needs to buy food for the misplaced people, then, Ukrainians buy it from Ukrainian businesses and whatnot. So that way the economy keeps going as well. So actually donating to causes and foundations inside Ukraine is paramount. Donating to international organizations can be tricky because a lot of them take very big overheads for their operational support and whatnot. And not all of that money has been allocated, the way it should have been. So virtually seeking out and helping Ukrainian charities is the number one way to go for regular people.
And Olek, you've been doing a lot of outreach work here and trying to drum up support for Ukraine. Can you tell us what the Taiwanese response has been?
Well, there's been a lot of understanding and solidarity. I think Taiwanese people, the war in Ukraine resonates with many Taiwanese people, perhaps because many project what's happening in Ukraine onto Taiwan, onto their own lives and safety. But generally, we've met a lot of understanding, and that's, I think, one of the reasons why for our organizations and initiatives in Taiwan, it's so much easier to rally support, to organize events, to have massive information campaigns, and to also promote Ukraine's narratives. I would say, from my experience, it's easier than in other East Asian countries, some other East Asian countries, yes.
Right. And Melaniya, when we talk about support for Ukraine, how much are you relying on the international community to give the backing that you guys need? And do you feel that there is enough of that?
The international community has saved Ukraine in the first couple of months. If it wasn't it's not just about money. It's not just about, supplying Ukrainians with goods. It's about the fact that Western societies, people in in Europe and abroad and everywhere, actually, they have pressured their governments to help Ukraine. It was not about, politicians obviously played a big role, but it was the will of regular people who felt for Ukrainians, who felt for the war, who could relate and who felt really bad. So the extent of the help that we have been given by our partners abroad, not only financial, but also political and, as a society, it cannot be overestimated. It was paramount to our, I wouldn't call it success yet, but it was paramount to our, being where we are right now.
And Olek, speaking of governmental level support from Taiwan, what have you been seeing? And do you think Taiwan's government has extended itself enough to Ukraine?
Yeah, early on, Taiwanese government has shown signs, even before the full-scale invasion started. They've mentioned that they wouldn't, just be sitting and watching if Russia were to go on through what some people feared would happen. And when it happened, Taiwan, of course, mobilized a lot of resources. The official government here, they set up a fund at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and collected millions of United States dollars that then was directed to first to European countries that received Ukrainian refugees, and later it progressed towards better communication between Ukraine and Taiwan directly. And as we know, Taiwan allocated a lot of money also directly to local governments in Ukraine, to hospitals, even to churches. And we know, for example, they donated 2 million USD to Kharkiv for reconstruction. And I think there's even more to come. And that's only the official government. And then there's a lot of actors, political, non-political, civil societies, NGOs, who all rallied resources and sent it massively to Ukraine, to organizations in Ukraine, including, Prytula Foundation, for example. I know one of our agendas early on was to convince people to donate to those organizations directly.
So, as we've been discussing, Taiwan is eager to contribute to the Ukrainian cause. But there is one man who has been standing for Ukraine literally almost every day in the Taiwanese capital of Taipei. Here's Alex Komenko and his tireless fight.
Outside Russia's de facto embassy in Taipei, demonstrators defiantly wave the Ukrainian flag. Among them is Ukrainian-born Alex Komenko.
We still are here protesting twice a week and raising some money and showing the Russians that we're here, we're not going away.
For the first 100 days of the war, Alex came to this spot 5 days a week. I first met him here the day after Russia launched its invasion.
And so, yeah, it's unbelievable, right? It's the country where some of my family lives. It's the country that my Ukrainian grandfather fought for in World War II. He lived in Russia. And thankfully, in some way, he didn't live to see this day. If he did, it would just blow his mind that a fratricidal war is happening.
Moscow's attack on Ukraine has sparked Europe's deadliest conflict since World War II. The US estimates more than 100,000 soldiers on both sides have been killed since the war began. And the UN says at least 13 million Ukrainians are displaced.
So we spoke at this spot almost over a year ago now, on the day after the invasion began. How do you reflect on that period of time, a year on?
I mean, it's hard to remember those early days, honestly. The first 4 or 5 months or so were incredibly hard. And it sucks to say that, but in some ways you learn to live with the war, right? You learn to live with the fact that people are dying and atrocities are happening every day. And you have to become a little bit immune to that.
So how do you go about dealing with the long-term emotional impact of what you've been experiencing over the last year?
I'm lucky that I have a family right here. I have kids. Family helps you keep grounded and, focusing on them as much as I can in addition to this. You have to try to limit your information consumption, right? You can't just be sitting here all day looking at the worst possible news, right? That are always there. And yeah, just focus on our work.
Alex is a volunteer organizer for Taiwan Stands with Ukraine, a non-profit group that supports and raises funds for Ukraine. Since the start of the war, they've put on dozens of festivals, protests and art fairs, raising around $50,000 in the process. But with no immediate end in sight to the conflict, sustaining the public's attention has become more difficult.
How have you been dealing with the problem of attention fatigue? What sort of challenges does that bring?
It's understandable. It's human nature, right? Taiwan is pretty far away, and Taiwan news cycle moves pretty quickly. So there is not maybe that much in the news anymore.
And for Alex, his determined work from thousands of miles away is about one thing: doing his bit for his country.
We love telling people who say they want to visit Ukraine, when they donate us money, like we say, we know, we will come. One day you will come and you will visit. And you'll see how wonderful it is.
Seeing Lin and James Chater for Connected.
Melaniya, one of the biggest issues with any big event around the world or any continuing event around the world is fatigue. And that is a huge danger, particularly in a war scenario, a long-term war scenario where you're just getting news every single day about it. How concerned are you that at some point, or probably even now when you're on, that people are turning off to the situation in Ukraine because it has become somewhat the new normal?
Yes, that is an issue, and it scares me sometimes. But then there's something that people, should always bear in mind: is if this does not stop in Ukraine, if this is not contained here and pushed away back to where it belongs in its borders, it's going to spread. This is how Russia works. This is how these imperialist countries work. So it is in everybody's biggest interest to help Ukrainians win this and have this contained here. And I just hope that this kind of is in the minds of those who are willing to, give up and sort of stop being interested in this war, because Ukrainians have been very vocal about the fact that we don't expect anybody to fight this fight for us, and we would like to keep it this way. We would like this war to be, contained and stopped here. We would not want other countries to live through what we lived through. So I think this is a good enough motivation for the world to kind of keep on their tones and concern to war in Ukraine.
Oleg, Taiwan is one place where this would definitely be at the forefront of many people's minds here, that it could be a possibility here in Taiwan itself. But at the same time, it doesn't mean there won't be that kind of fatigue, or people's attentions will be moved away from what's happening in Ukraine. And are you seeing that happen here in Taiwan?
I'm not sure, actually. I think it's complex because there are people, of course, who stop paying attention because they just get tired, and there's only this long that you can pay attention to someone else's tragedy, especially if you have little understanding that that might affect you as well. But there's also people who are actively trying to promote narratives like, well, why do we have to support Ukraine and pay attention to Ukraine news while there is something happening here in the world or there in the world? I think that is a wrong way to approach this. It's probably also part of Russia's disinformation campaign to try to drive attention away from Ukraine. We shouldn't see Ukraine and Russian invasion in Ukraine as something unique. It's a part of a bigger picture of how a democracy is defending itself against authoritarian invasion, against a colonial power that's, never going to stop being hungry. So that's based on that. I think people should not stop caring about Ukraine while also caring about other causes. It's not either this or that. It's a bigger picture. And people should understand that it's going to affect their lives as well, as Melaniya said. In Taiwan, I feel like perhaps I'm in a social bubble at this point, so it's really hard for me to judge. Of course, I see that same level of solidarity and attention around me and people who come and support us. But I can only hope that this fatigue in Taiwan, at least, won't won't drive attention away from Ukraine too much.
All right. Okay. Let's talk about Russia now. The country has been sanctioned after the beginning of the invasion, but it seems over time the focus has shifted. The International Olympic Committee's decision to allow Russia and Belarusian athletes to compete even under a neutral flag has upset many in Ukraine. I mean, look at this tweet here. This is from the retired heavyweight boxing champion Vladimir Klitschko. He had this to say: the IOC authorizes the Russian and Belarusian athletes to participate in the Olympic Games under a, quote, neutral flag. He calls that decision a false flag and nonsense, saying that the IOC president is serving the interests of Russia. Let me bring this to you, Oleg. There are many who say that, look, why are you punishing a whole population for the actions of its leaders or the upper echelons of power? And there is a constant discussion about that. How do you feel about how, particularly for one thing, about what we just saw there with the athletes being allowed to participate in the Olympics, but also the wider insinuation that Russians, they all shouldn't be tarred with the same brush?
Well, there's a lot of effort from certain actors around the world to kind of try to promote this idea that Putin and the war are somehow separate from Russia. Unfortunately, that's not true. In my opinion, and also I think many Ukrainians believe that way. Russia has had this trait in it before Putin and before this war. And we can see that there's a lot of Russian people supporting this war. And I'm not saying that there's no Russians who are against and who are pro-Ukrainian, which unfortunately is not the same. I also see, and we see athletes, people from, music industry, from show business, Russians who support this war as much. So I think by sanctioning Russia on various platforms around the world, we can really try to force them via this powerful channel to kind of like realize that this is wrong, what they're doing is wrong, and to show them that the world has their solidarity with Ukraine. But if we allow them on certain platforms and then more and more and more, then we're, of course, reducing the amount of Ukrainian voices that can go out there and speak, and they're going to be silenced.
And Melaniya, how do people in Ukraine feel about the Russian civilian population?
In the eyes of Ukrainians, regular Russians, those civilians who don't take part in war, they had every single chance in the past 30 years to change something in the country. And there have been bells rung all over the place concerning that. I mean, 2008 invasion of Georgia, killing of all the, active opposing powers to Russia and whatnot. So they had the chance to fix something, and they never did. Moreover, they're kind of supporting this war because of obviously propaganda and brainwashing and whatnot. So there are no nice feelings. However, Ukrainians are way too busy dealing with their own things rather than caring about Russian population. So often we hear this argument like, what about regular Russians? Don't you feel bad for them? They're sort of under occupation now. It's usually kind of offensive for Ukrainian because we really don't care about them at this point. Everybody should care about themselves. And the only reason they're in the situation they are in now is because they did nothing. And that is an overwhelming sentiment here in Ukraine. And I think this is what is going to, the relationships between our nations will never be fixed, never, ever. But nevertheless, Ukrainians only care about our people at this point and losing as little people as possible.
Right. Closer to home, another authoritarian regime, China. Let's talk about China. China claims Taiwan as its own and time again threatened to take it by force, but also has shown support for Russia. Now, recently, the Chinese president held talks with Russia's leader, Vladimir Putin. So now Ukraine's president, Volodymyr Zelensky, has extended an invitation to Xi Jinping. And as we see from this tweet from the Kyiv Independent, saying that Ukraine is ready to see him there. Let me bring this to you, Melaniya. How, China was once Ukraine's largest trading partner. Ties were growing. How do they now view, or how do you now view China?
There's a very clear sentiment against China now, since obviously, authoritarian regimes are all alike, and Ukrainians are very aware of that. How can a country that has concentration camps be supported by a country who literally has to live through the reality every day also? So obviously there aren't any good emotions connected to China now, and obviously China's support of Putin and Russia, it's not visible, but it's there and we know it. So obviously there can be no reconciliation between our countries also, and then especially given the China's long-standing tradition of doing the same thing Russia's been doing for years to us. There is no way regular Ukrainians could ever look at this country as anything else but, like a co-conspirator to whatever's happening in Ukraine now.
So, Oleg, from your standpoint, being so geographically close to China and watching kind of one authoritarian regime take over your hometown, a lot of parallels have been drawn with Taiwan and China. Do you feel like those parallels are justified and Taiwan needs to take note?
I truly want to believe that the parallels are not justified when we talk about the future. I don't want to think that Taiwan will be invaded, and I think there are all tools to prevent it from happening. That said, I do believe that Taiwan should be the country that is preparing because as a Ukrainian, I can say I don't think that my country was fully prepared to that because perhaps many people didn't realize that this would ever happen, or it was just wishful thinking. I don't know. But I think Taiwan can take a lesson from this in this regard, at least, and see how it can prepare or seek tools, partnerships, resources in order to prevent this from happening.
Well, for many in Taiwan, Russia's invasion drew a stark picture of what could happen in their own country if China acted on its threats to take Taiwan by force. Suddenly, for many, the possibility of war became more real and more imminent. Qian Chichang, a photographer from Taiwan, went to Ukraine soon after the war broke out to document the conflict. We spoke to him about what compelled him to make that journey.
As Taiwanese living overseas in Europe, I feel the war is very imminent. And considering the situation between the conflict between Taiwan and China, I just feel, I wanted to go. And I'm not an assignment photographer. I didn't want to wait for any assignment. 2022, I went to Ukraine 4 times. The first time was just like 4 or 5 days after the invasion. I wanted to go. I needed to go, especially as a Taiwanese. I feel it's important to witness, to document the war, the atrocity, the Ukrainian resistance. So I have spent time in trenches, in the cellars with the soldiers, which is quite hard and could be hairy sometimes, yeah. Because you don't know where the rockets are coming. So yeah, there are a number of close calls, luckily. I think initially people are very uncertain, worried, and of course, in the beginning, the first couple weeks or maybe months, you see the entire population just kind of tilted from the east to the west, moving towards Poland, all those European countries. But people are returning, and the fighters continue to fight. People support their fighters, but they also try to get on with their life, sort of having a quote-unquote normal life under the war condition. I don't think people are really prepared. No place is 100% secure, and I think it's better to know, what the potential danger, might be. Just be prepared. Initially, beginning of the war or before the beginning of the war, yeah, I think people are more concerned, worried, or sort of prepared to some prepared to flee, frankly. But over time, I think people are just kind of numb or I don't know.
So Melaniya, in that report, that photographer went to Ukraine in the first few days of war because he felt like it was important for him to witness what was happening, to understand what could happen in Taiwan. But in general, if you look broadly about how Ukrainians feel about Taiwan, do you feel their sentiments towards Taiwan has changed? Is there a feeling of solidarity?
Oh, yes, definitely 100%. It is very important for Ukrainians to find kind of partners, not also in terms of aid, but also partner in terms of, nations that can understand what's going on. I mean, especially about Taiwan and a couple of years ago when the protests in Hong Kong happened also. So Ukrainians are very sensitive to these issues. Ukrainians are very sensitive to, the concept of a big bully country trying to exert their influence and their, way of life over other sovereign nations and sovereign countries and sovereign states. So obviously there's this huge amount of solidarity, and people are actually very worried. And I have heard a lot of people talk about this. People are mostly concerned that people can live through the same kind of atrocities that we are living through right now. And it is something that nobody would ever wish upon anyone. So there's definite friendship forming there.
And the concern is that, today Ukraine, tomorrow it could be anywhere in the world. Thank you very much to both our guests. It's time to wrap up our special edition of Connected on the Ukraine war. And huge thank you to our guests, Melaniya Podolyak in Lviv and Olek Shyn in Taipei, for being with us. And to our viewers, thank you for your company. We hope that this will be a reminder to keep the compassion and never forget there are millions of people around the world paying the price of senseless wars and conflicts. Thank you, goodbye, and stay connected.